She seated me by the kitchen, where I observed my son's wedding through a movable door that was concealed behind a tray of shrimp cocktail. The wedding, including each chair and flower, was entirely my responsibility. But I was not present when the music began and the toasts began. I was not even close. I maintained my composure, smiled, and, after consuming the final piece of cake, I incinerated it with a single phone call. If you are interested in this topic, please subscribe and inform me of your location. There was no sign, card, nameplate, or effusive salutation, only a folding chair with a paper napkin thrown over the seat. My position was situated between a wheeled cart with a damaged tire that squeaked whenever someone pushed it and a mound of used trays. I stood there for a few seconds, blinking vigorously. The air was dense with the sour aroma of marinara, which clung to the vapor emanating from the kitchen doors. I felt the heat of the furnaces pressing against my back, and a part of me contorted. I gazed down at my dress, which was hand-stitched from delicate mauve chiffon. I had spent 3 hours that morning having my hair styled, a time during which I pretended that this day would be as special for me as it was for them. However, no one had informed me. No one stated, "We have made alternative seating arrangements." No one, not even Daniel, took notice of me upon my arrival. He was preoccupied with adjusting his cufflinks, beaming broadly, and allowing her mother to kiss him on the cheek as if she had raised him. She was the one who remained awake every night when he experienced night terrors, just as she was the one who worked double shifts when he required orthodontics, and I was unable to afford both his rent and his smile. I held on to my tiny, beige leather pocketbook, which he had gifted me for Mother's Day years ago when he still addressed me as Mama. My palms were trembling. I could detect a subtle vibration in my wrists, as if an electrical current was attempting to escape through my digits. The catering manager, a youth who was undoubtedly incapable of being older than, smiled uneasily. "Ma'am, they informed me that you were supposed to remain in this location." The betrothed was adamant about avoiding any visual conflicts with the motif. I fixed my gaze on him. "Theme?" He glanced at the doors that were in motion, and he winced. A piercing bang was heard as the metallic edge struck the wall once more. The reception hall was filled with laughter, which was immediately followed by a sudden eruption of music that resembled aesthetic consistency, complete with the accompanying photos. I sat down at a leisurely pace. The chair made a creaking noise. A dark stain was present on the floor beneath my soles. Gravy, potentially. During the process of shifting my shoes, they became marginally caught. I examined my cuticles, which were recently painted in a delicate shade of pink. Then, a damaged white plate was placed in front of me, containing a chili chicken breast. The most detrimental aspect? I refrained from uttering any words, not a single remark, because it was his day. Because I told myself, don't spoil this for him. Refrain from being that mother. Because I had paid for everything and continued to believe that it was significant. I retrieved the program that had been distributed to me at the chapel. Cursive writing in an elegant style on ivory cardstock. I am not mentioned in any way. Her father escorted her down the aisle. The inaugural address was delivered by her mother. I was merely the thread that connected the purse. The phantom in the kitchen. No one desired to include the woman in the photograph. The door swung once more. I caught a glimpse of the chandelier, the commencement of the ensemble, the inaugural performance. Twirling in the gentle golden light are Daniel and Emily. He did not even glance at me once. I pretended to wipe a non-existent stain by placing my napkin against my mouth. My irises were swollen. I convinced myself that it was the onions from the kitchen, the vapor, the humidity, not the betrayal. However, it was, my God. And somewhere within me, a fissure appeared, in a low voice. Similar to a hairline fracture in glass, the full extent of the agony is not apparent until it is shattered. I gazed at the wall that was directly in front of me. A fire extinguisher was concealed by a section of flaking paint. I gazed at it with such intensity that I was convinced I would sear a hole through it. My anchor was that location, my primary focus. I am only able to maintain my composure in the presence of a server who is carrying crab fritters. Because if I allowed myself to weep, I was uncertain if I would ever be able to cease. I exhaled deeply, then another. The chicken on my platter had become chilly. I refrained from handling it. Eventually, someone brought out dessert. I refrained from tasting it. I simply gazed at the layers of gold and white, her hues, her flawless little vision. Subsequently, I reached out. It was brief, direct. It was unnecessary for me to provide an explanation. 3 straightforward cancellations. The floral arrangements for the brunch scheduled for tomorrow, the remaining portion of the band's payment, and the open bar that was intended to remain open until midnight. I maintained a consistent tone, remained composed, managed. Additionally, I did not experience any feelings of remorse upon terminating the call. I did not experience any sense of remorse. I experienced the initial glimmer of an experience that had been absent for several years. Might. Once more, I gazed downward at my hands. Shaking has ceased. My spirit. Racing is no longer conducted. This is merely a gentle murmur, similar to an engine that is reactivated. The door swung once more. An additional burst of illumination, of mirth, of the milieu from which I was excluded. Allow them to salute without my presence. I now had my own agenda. I was unable to slumber that night. Absolutely not. I reclined in the hotel bed, which was exceedingly firm. I am still wearing my frock. I was transfixed by the ceiling fan that was whirling above me, as if it were about to abruptly unwind and strike my torso. I had half hoped that it would. I could still detect the aroma of kitchen oil in my tresses. The sour fragrance of my own perspiration was intermingled with the perfume of expensive roses. The feeling of humiliation adheres to my epidermis like a second skin. I eventually removed my shoes. My ankles were distended. Throughout the duration of the reception, they would experience discomfort. However, I hadn't dared to remove them. It was necessary for me to maintain a professional appearance. Even in the kitchen, I awoke at approximately a.m. Red light emanated from the digital timepiece. Once more, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. I neglected to verify it. I was already aware of the contents. Apologies for the missed messages from Daniel. From Emily. My niece recently sent me a message inquiring, "What transpired?" Everyone is in a state of panic. I accessed the wedding budget spreadsheet on my tablet. For more than a year, I had maintained it with scrupulous care. I was aware of every cent, each modification, each enhancement. Emily requested each indulgence. She consistently maintained a taut smile and employed that term with the precision of a scalpel that was enveloped in satin. Increased, Margaret. We simply desire something that is slightly more sophisticated. That is how I came to accept invitations that were hand calligraphed by a boutique Etsy vendor in Vermont. This is how the venue transitioned from the community church hall to a restored farm that was adorned with antique whiskey casks and chandeliers. This is how the open bar expanded to include a personalized cocktail menu, and the cake expanded from 2 to 5 tiers. I was responsible for the entire cost. No one proposed to share the expense. Not Daniel, not her guardians, and I never inquired, because I desired for him to have everything that I was unable to afford during his childhood. I perused the transactions. Upon seeing them, I caught my breath. 2 unauthorized charges were made mere days prior to the wedding. Bar receipt from a sampling event. Upgrade to the dress rehearsal supper. I was once again seated in the rear of the restaurant, near the kitchen. My intestines contracted. Double-checking the card was carried out. My identification certificate. Employed without authorization. The note she left for one of her attendants on Venmo was the next thing I noticed. His mother is responsible for all expenses. Might as well go all out. Wedding atmosphere. I refrained from weeping. Not at this time. I experienced no sensation. That odd, heavy nothing that results from an excessive amount of agony. It was as though my internal organs had become paralyzed. It was as though my nerve endings had coiled inward in order to safeguard themselves. I reached over and activated the lamp. My eyes were irritated by the light. I proceeded to the mirror situated above the dresser. I was taken aback by my own reflection. I had mascara that had been smeared beneath my eyes. The delicate contours of my mouth had become hardened into an unfamiliar form. I had lifeless hair. One side of the cushioning was flattened. I appeared to have aged 10 years in a single night. However, something changed shortly thereafter. I sat down at the desk, cleansed my face, and combed my hair back before opening my email. 3 messages were composed by me. One to the florist. Kindly cancel the Sunday delivery. The payment balance is withheld. I am grateful. One to the ensemble. The second performance will not be necessary as a result of the event schedule's modifications. Kindly conclude the matter. One to the bar vendor. We are reducing the scope of our post-reception services. Kindly cancel the second shift. Refrain from processing the remaining balance. All individuals were courteous. Each individual is a professional. However, this is the last word. It was nearly dawn when I pressed the send button. And as the sky outside transitioned from black to mottled blue, I sat on the bed, listened to the gentle murmur of the air conditioning, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. I was not incensed. Not yet. However, I had reached my limit, stopped being practical. The wallet has been completed. The act of being done is an afterthought. Allow them to resolve the matter. Allow them to flee. Let them recall the moment when the music ceased, the bar ceased to serve, and the flowers never arrived, and contemplate the reason. And perhaps, just maybe, they would recall the individual who initially facilitated the nuptials, the woman who is currently in the kitchen, the individual they did not wish to include in the photographs. The music resonated through the wall in a manner reminiscent of a distant heartbeat. In that folding chair, I perched with a Diet Coke from the catering refrigerator and a plate of chili hors d'oeuvres, attempting to avoid listening. However, I was unable to resist. Each and every laughing moment. I wish you all the best. Each clinking glass. It all returned through the swinging door, serving as a spiteful reminder of my absence. I could hear someone making a toast. A male intonation. Most likely, it is her father, or perhaps Daniel's closest friend. I leaned back slightly, just enough to capture a view through the crack of the door. They were arranged in a row in front of the floral arch that I had paid Diedland for. Chairs that are made of gold, candles that are suspended in the air, custom neon sign that displayed the phrase, "The future is forever," in a flowing cursive font. Despite my inability to perceive the features, I was able to identify the voices. Susan, Emily's mother, employs her characteristically phony sympathy. "Daniel, I am so sorry. You are the most empathetic individual I have ever encountered. Emily is exceedingly fortunate." I then burst into hilarity. "Thanks." I was paralyzed. Susan was situated at the head of the table. She appeared to have been born into a wealthy family, as she was draped in navy chiffon and adorned with pearls. She was not. She had only encountered me on 3 occasions prior to the wedding. I was never questioned about my personal affairs. I was never thanked for the contributions. Never made an offer to contribute a single dime. Emily's father, who occupies the adjacent position, conducts himself with the dignity of a suburban monarch. Boisterous laughter. The same individual who informed me at the rehearsal dinner, "We are truly impressed by your perseverance, raising Daniel independently. It must have been a challenging experience." Tenacity. It was as though I had climbed a mountain, rather than spent years in a shack, in order to ensure that my child could have a life free of hand-me-downs. Daniel was also present. "My name is Daniel," smiling in a manner that is unfamiliar. Sitting between her parents, it appeared as though he had always been a part of the family. I conducted a search for my own kin. Carol, my sister, occupied the second pew, adjacent to our cousin, Diane. Neither of them directed their gaze toward the kitchen. No one did. I was not involved in the production. I was an issue that was resolved by a door that swung shut and a chair in the rear. Someone brushed past me. A attendant. A young lady. It is probable that they are in college. She smiled as she cast her eyes on my plate. Guilty and awkward. "Would you like a refill or anything?" I shook my head. I am in good health. However, I was not. No, I was not. Every inch of my body was in pain. My mandible, shoulders, and feet were so tightly gripped that they caused a pulsing sensation behind my eyes. My heart lay heavily in my chest, like a lump of something putrid that refused to move. I gazed downward at the tray. 3 olives, a portion of brie, a small, forlorn triangle of toast. I was unable to consume any food, despite the fact that I had not eaten since breakfast. I held my midriff in a clenched fist. My pharyngeal passage is limited. I considered the seating schedule. I had delicately inquired of Emily several weeks prior. "Have you determined the location of my seat?" She grinned. Constrictive. Bright. "Everything is still being finalized. Don't be concerned, Margaret. You will be included." I should have been aware. I was aware. I was aware that I was being managed in some way. Deep down. Manipulated as a decoration. Requested to retrieve the checkbook. Optics were tolerated. However, it was never a genuine desire. The most detrimental aspect? I consented to all requests. I allowed them to gradually diminish my responsibilities, one small concession at a time. I will refrain from delivering a speech. There will be no mother-son performance, as they have expressed that it would be uncomfortable. No photographs are permitted prior to the ceremony. There is no mention in the program, merely a seat. In the kitchen, I once again heard Daniel chuckling. When I would pursue him through the sprinkler in our backyard as a child, he would emit a deep, rumbling chuckle. The same guffaw that I had not heard directed at me in years. Something began to rise in my bosom. Not sorrow, not disappointment, fury. Silent, managed. Fury that is devastating. I rose from my seat, strolled toward the door that was in motion. I placed my hand on the edge and apply a modest pressure, merely enough to allow for another glimpse. Emily and I met eyes. She saw me. She was aware of my location, was aware of her actions. She also grinned, not with apologies, not with apprehension, however, in a composed manner, with assurance, like it was a natural occurrence. I felt as though I was precisely where I belonged. She retreated toward her attendants. She threw her head back, and they laughed. That was the moment I became aware. This was not an error. This was not an oversight. This was intentional. They had devised it, selected it. She did not wish for me to attend. Daniel had permitted her. They both possessed it. As quickly as that, an internal transformation occurred within me. There is no malfunction. False. Not at this time. Repositioned. The position I occupied in their lives were altered. I had exhausted my ability to maintain my denial. Allow them to be the center of attention. Allow them to consume their champagne. They believed that I was entirely invisible. They were unaware of the items that I could acquire. While I was still standing by the kitchen door, the salute commenced. The reception hall's illumination had been diminished by an individual. Above me, the radiance of string lights was visible. Additionally, the outlets on each table emit a golden glow. A single shriek emanated from the microphone. The room was then filled with the booming voice of her father, resembling that of a game show host. To our daughter Emily and her ideal new spouse, Daniel. A round of applause ensued. I retreated. The kitchen that was situated behind me was disorganized. Clanking metal containers. The volume of voices is increasing. A servant engaged in a dispute regarding the gluten-free dish at table 12. I relocated to the side. Against the wall, they leaned. The plaster was icy against my back. The air was permeated with the aroma of heated oil and garlic. Her father continued to advance from the opposite side of the door. Emily expressed her desire for a fairy tale when she was a child. A castle, a monarch, and a joyful conclusion. Well, my dear, you have it today. Even more acclaim. My respiration was temporarily interrupted. During Daniel's childhood, he was never present. I never observed me mopping excrement off the restroom floor at a.m. He never observed me reattach buttons to his school uniform. He was never transported to a chess tournament by driving on wet roadways for miles. However, they were in the process of revising the narrative today. Additionally, I had been eliminated within the editing process. Once more, I gazed downward at my hands. I had blotchy fingertips. The epidermis is thin and faintly trembling. The frigid air vent above caused my arms to tingle. Then it was Emily's mother's turn. Her voice was saccharine and overly rehearsed. We are extremely appreciative of the support of so many individuals who cherish Emily and Daniel today. Additionally, to extend a warm welcome to Daniel into our family. He is already like a second son to us. This is yet another reason to celebrate. Similar to a second offspring, not a single remark about me, without a single mention of the woman who nurtured him. False. Margaret, I am grateful for all that you have done. False. You are greatly appreciated for your generosity. False. Without her, this day would not have been feasible. Nothing. I bit the inside of my cheek so forcefully that I could taste blood. I experienced discomfort in my ankles. However, I declined to stay. Subsequently, I encountered the portion that disturbed me. The address of the betrothed. Daniel assumed the microphone. He appeared effervescent, durable, mandible, self-assurance. I had contributed to the purchase of a tailored uniform. I had observed him draw his first breath in a neonatal intensive care unit. Presently, he stood in that location, expanded, radiant, an unknown individual. I would like to express my gratitude to all those who were present, he stated. I was surprised by the depth of his voice, polished. It was as though he had practiced it in front of a mirror. I am exceedingly fortunate. Emily, you have brought me the greatest joy in the world. Additionally, to your family, I am grateful for your warm reception. I am genuinely at ease with all of you. My larynx contracted. Additionally, to all those who contributed to the realization of today, I am grateful. This has been the most extraordinary day of our lives. My name was never mentioned, not a single time. The venue had been compensated by me, the caterer, the photographer, the linens, the DJ, the neon sign that was customized. I even purchased the dress that Emily was wearing as she stood there with her hand on his arm. Nevertheless, I did not exist. The servants applauded. I refrained from migrating. The band resumed its performance. The dance floor began to fill. On a plastic plate, an individual presented me with a slice of cake. I fixed my gaze on it. Vanilla, with raspberry filling. Her preferred option. Raspberry is not my favorite flavor. Never occurred. I examined the slender gold utensil that they presented to me. Now, my hand was stable. I recollected the occasion when Daniel turned 10 and requested a chocolate confection with decorations. I worked an additional 2 shifts in order to purchase the item from the patisserie that he had indicated in the window. When he observed it, his eyes were illuminated. He embraced me so tightly that day. The guy had vanished. A man who neglected to save me a chair was in his position. The cake was placed aside. I refrained from eating dessert until the final morsel was served, until individuals began to rise, releasing their bonds, removing the fondant from their lips, until the music achieved its ideal climax. Afterward, I exited the kitchen, directly past the servers, directly beyond the bar, out the side door. The air outside was chilly and still, the type of silence that resonates in your hearing. I took my phone out. 3 telephone conversations, 1 to the florist, 1 to the ensemble, 1 to the tavern manager, courteous, direct. Explanations are unnecessary. The wheels were already in motion by the time I returned to the hotel. How about luncheon tomorrow? Abandoned? What is the late-night music playlist? Extracted. A second bartender and cocktail menu? Disappeared. I had maintained my silence for an extended period of time. Allow them to relish the remainder. Allow them to experience the disparity. Absence. Allow them to pose inquiries. It did not matter to me whether or not they referred to me as histrionic, insignificant, unappreciative. They have already eliminated me from the narrative. I merely turned the leaf. The hotel room emanated a faint metallic scent and the scent of rose moisturizer. Perhaps the tension, potentially my epidermis. I sat cross-legged on the bed, the comforter beneath me still flawlessly made, undisturbed since I checked in 2 nights ago. I had refrained from weeping, not a single time. However, something within me had become icy, not solid, false. Brittleness is a characteristic of frozen objects. They break. I was undergoing a process of hardening, tempered. The sun had not yet risen. I reached into my purse and extracted my phone. 6 missed messages, 2 voicemails, a dozen messages. Daniel, what is your current location? What is the reason for the cancellation of the brunch? Seriously, mother, this is not amusing. Emily, I am unable to comprehend the situation. Are you in good health? Kindly provide a response. This is exceedingly juvenile. I was amused. In a low voice. a brief exhalation of air from my nostrils. Childish? I reopened the banking application. I moved my fingertips with the muscle memory of an individual who had balanced a checkbook every Sunday for 3 decades. The allegations persisted. Unauthorized. Self-centered. The bride, my new daughter-in-law, had accessed my card to pay for a pre-wedding pub tour and a spa day with her bridal party. I could observe every detail in the itemized invoices. Champagne bottles, pedicures, face coverings, brunch for 8. I was not questioned. No one even informed me. The trust that I had been carrying in my bosom, like a warm, familiar quilt, was shattered. Much like someone had used shears to cut it while I was asleep. I navigated to my email inbox. 2 novel ones were introduced. One from the florist. We are disappointed by the abrupt cancellation, but we comprehend the situation. As per our agreement, refunds are not issued for cancellations made with less than 1 hour's notice. All right. The promoter of the band sent the second email. When the cancellation was received, we were midway through the setup process. It is exceedingly uncommon. However, your message was unambiguous. The deposit will remain unaltered. Additionally, this is acceptable. I was not undertaking this activity in order to receive a refund. This was intended for me, for the woman who is invisible in the kitchen chair, for the mother who was excluded from her son's milestone. My innards roiled. I had not consumed food since the previous day. The mere mention of sustenance caused me to feel queasy. I rose instead, opened the rigid draperies, and observed the sun's descent into the sky. Orange, then fuchsia. Subsequently, a delicate yellow hue appeared, rendering all objects appear surreal. Then I recalled something. A diminutive red file folder concealed within the compartment of my bureau at home. Documentation that is outdated. Matters of law. Letters that I have never disposed of. I was drawn to it, as if it had been whispering to me throughout the entire time. My belongings were stored gradually. Took a shower. The resentment and the perfume were washed away. My hair was dried. Put on a button-down shirt and jeans that still had a subtle scent of lavender detergent. The hotel was exited without a word. Driving home was tranquil. I could only hear the gentle static of the radio playing unfamiliar tunes and the sound of tires on asphalt. A type of drive in which one begins to hear their own thoughts, unfiltered and in full volume. He did not refer to you. Your location was observed by all. No action was taken. The roses that I had planted 2 summers prior were in full blossom when I arrived at my driveway. I did not pause to express my admiration for them. I proceeded directly to the bedroom. The wardrobe was opened. The crimson folder was extracted. Seated on the bed, a letter was located at the base of the stack, nestled underneath a few photographs and old insurance documents that I had not viewed in years. Yellowing was observed at the extremities of the envelope, postmarked from Arizona. A date that was inscribed in the handwriting of my late spouse, the year in which he departed. I recall discovering it several weeks after his passing. At that time, I had not yet accessed it. I was unable to. It had a sensation akin to salt being applied to an exposed laceration. It was as though he were permitted to speak from the grave when I was not prepared to attend. However, I now inserted my finger beneath the cover. The paper was exceedingly flimsy. His handwriting was both familiar and slanted. It was initially straightforward. Margaret, I am aware that you were never interested in receiving further correspondence from me. However, I must inform you of something. I detected an increase in my heart rate. I experienced a minor tremor in my wrists. I have been concealing a secret, and I am unable to carry it with me to the grave. You are entitled to the truth, Daniel. He is not biologically yours. Years ago, I discovered the information. Emily was expectant at the time of our relationship. I believed that I could convince myself that he was my own. However, this is not the case. You were never informed by either of us. I ceased reading. The room briefly rotated. Afterward, the matter was resolved. The remainder of the text was reviewed. My apologies. Justifications, regrets, words that were meaningless at the time. Daniel, my name is Daniel, was the result of an infidelity, another woman's offspring, left on my doorstep in the manner of a test that I was unaware I was undergoing. I succeeded. I received a passing grade. May God assist me. Each knee that has been scratched. Every bedtime narrative. I purchased footwear and class portraits for him during each night shift. Passing with high colors was my success. Nevertheless, I was present. Discarded. Substituted. Deleted. However, I now possess a newfound clarity. A truth that is so incisive that it can penetrate years of silence. I was no longer hemorrhaging. I refrained from weeping. Even as I sat there with the letter quivering in my lap, it was weighty than any object I had ever held. I did not release a solitary tear. What would be the purpose? Daniel's childhood was constructed with tears. His shoes were procured through tears. His asthma medication. His initial automobile. After his father's departure, they filled my pillow. And once more, as he crossed the high school stage, not a single individual in the throng turned to wave at me. Years ago, I had exhausted my supply of weeping. Presently, I was in possession of an alternative. Not sorrow. Not sorrow. Transparency. I proceeded to the kitchen and prepared a cup of coffee for myself. Black. Robust. The neighbor's sprinkler ticked, ticked, ticked across the lawn as I sat by the window. It was an ordinary Sunday morning. However, I was no longer the woman who subsidized the fanciful tale of another individual. In exchange, a collapsible chair was placed behind the punch basin. I was no longer the woman who would consume this. This is not it. The florist was the first contact I made when I opened my phone. There was a tranquility in my tone. Courteous. I expressed my gratitude for their comprehension. It was once again verified that the arrangements for Sunday would not be necessary. I did not provide an explanation. I did not owe them that. The subsequent act was the ensemble. The same tone. The same reticence regarding the cause. Then, the beverage service will commence. Greetings. Hi, I am Margaret Langley. Indeed, that is accurate. I am calling to rescind the cocktail reception for the post-wedding brunch. Indeed, false. There are no complications. It was merely a change of heart. I am grateful. Click. 3 telephone conversations, 3 edits. I had the option of leaving it in its current location. However, I refrained from doing so. Due to my awareness of that which was imminent, I deactivated my mobile device. 5 minutes later, it was reactivated. 38 messages remain unanswered. 3 voicemails. Once more, Daniel. Mother, where are you? The ensemble failed to appear. What the earth is happening? Emily's mother. I am unaware of the circumstances, but this is exceedingly unprofessional. Individuals are posing inquiries. Afterward, Emily herself. Margaret, are you truly angry about the seating arrangement? That is merely trivial. We possessed a vision. Avoid damage to this. Insignificant. The term was repeated, similar to an epithet, similar to a branding iron. And yet, when I closed my eyes, all I could see was her smirking across the reception hall, knowing exactly where I was. She was aware of her actions, recognizing that I would not respond aggressively. That is, until now. I again deactivated the phone. Allow them to escalate. Allow the inquiries to accumulate. Allow them to comprehend that the bar was depleted due to my presence as the well. The music ceased as a result of my payment for the final note. The blooms were never delivered due to the decay of the roots. I conducted a thorough cleaning of the kitchen. Counters were cleaned. The cat was provided with food. It was the most tranquil I had experienced in months. The doorbell sounded at approximately noon. I refrained from responding. Allow them to enter. Allow them to endure the distress of their own experience. Late that evening, I uploaded a solitary photograph to Facebook. Not related to the wedding. Not from me. I have attached a photograph of the check that I wrote. The account number has been obscured. The signature was left visible. There is no accompanying text. There is no explanation. That is all. A reality that they were unable to refute. Receipt for sacrifice. I then logged off. Not exclusively from Facebook. From the burden of remorse. From the silence. From denying that this was betrayal. Their clarifications were unnecessary. Their perspective. Their justifications. Allow them to remain in the debris. I was not going to protect them from it. The initial indication that they were in a state of panic was the silence. Please refrain from sending any further messages. Please refrain from making any further calls. A peculiar, elongating silence, similar to the direct path of a storm's eye over my residence. It was palpable to me. The tension, the anticipation. They were unaware of my subsequent actions. I did not, either. However, it was intended to be mine. I once again sat by the window and brewed coffee on Monday morning. Absolutely no cosmetics. Earrings are prohibited. Me and the day. Additionally, there is the faint murmur of the refrigerator in the background. Daniel had not communicated with him since yesterday. The most recent voicemail was brief, firm, protective. You certainly caused a stir, Mother. Everyone is engaged in conversation. You caused us to feel ashamed. It is unclear to me what you were attempting to demonstrate. However, you overstepped your bounds. I did not even react when I heard it, because this is the reality. No one enjoys uttering their words openly. It is possible to donate everything to an individual. Your time, your money, your affection, and continue to be disposable. One may construct their entire universe and still be informed that they are not a part of the aesthetic. I was no longer astounded by the betrayal. The extent to which I had diminished my concern was a surprise to me, as I had ceased to seek their approbation. I removed his contact information from my phone that morning. The name alone. The quantity persisted. It was unnecessary for me to disregard him. I simply did not wish for his name to be illuminated on my screen as if it were still a permanent fixture. I ventured outside at approximately noon. Convenience, establishment, postal service, smaller tasks. Life persisted. Diane, my cousin who had traveled to attend the ceremony, was present in the confectionery aisle. I caught her eye, and she smiled. Yet there was apprehension regarding it. Margaret? Greetings. I nodded. She drew nearer and lowered her voice. Are you in good health? I gazed into her eyes. Were you unharmed? I inquired. Are you observing me as I sit in that position? She reddened. I was unaware that this was intentional. I entertained the possibility that you might be present. No. I made a gentle incision. You failed to consider the situation. Is that all? A prolonged period of silence ensued. I apologize. Finally, she stated. It was incorrect. I should have expressed my opinion. I nodded once. I am grateful. She appeared relieved, as if that brief moment of responsibility had liberated her. It had failed to liberate me. However, it was a beginning. Upon my arrival home, I discovered a bouquet on my doorstep. Carnations. One that is inexpensive. Wilting has already occurred. There is no certificate. I refrained from bringing them indoors. As an alternative, I led them directly to the garbage can. I visited Facebook later that evening. The check photo garnered nearly 100 comments. Former acquaintances, friends, neighbors, individuals with whom I had not communicated for an extended period of time. Some individuals were perplexed. A number of individuals were incensed. However, the majority comprehended. However, one comment stood out. Margaret, I was deeply saddened by this. Additionally, I have never been so emotionally invested in an object. We are grateful for your demonstration that we are not obligated to remain silent. That concluded the matter. The commencement of a new endeavor. Retribution is not the intention. Not out of malice. Might, reclaimed. Allow them to vent their frustrations in group conversations. Allow them to construct their own narrative. I refrained from responding. I did not provide an explanation. I was ultimately opting for silence, not as a submission. However, in terms of control, this time, the silence was mine. The drawer was the starting point, a rickety, antiquated item located in the dresser of the guest room, semi-stuck, always necessitating a slight pelvic elevation to facilitate opening. I was not even in search of a specific item. I was simply removing the remnants of an existence that I had been unable to sift through due to exhaustion. However, I discovered it in the midst of the deteriorating tax returns and expired coupons. Once more, that scarlet container. The same one that I believed I had already drained. However, a second letter was concealed within the sleeve. which was so thin that it could have been mistaken for part of the lining. This time, there is no envelope. I have just surrendered. At least once. Subsequently, written by hand, the same slanted scrawl, the same name. My ex-husband's signature appeared to me as an apparition, Michael. It was issued 3 days prior to his passing, Margaret. I assume that the initial correspondence has been received by you, as you are currently reading this. I am uncertain as to whether you have accessed it. I trust that you have. I will not squander time in the future issuing an apology. I must provide you with additional information, something that I was unable to transport. A statement that I should have made in the past. Daniel was not merely the offspring of another individual. He was never intended to be yours. He was abandoned by Emily at my doorstep, as she was unwilling to retain him. She was 18 years old, terrified. She requested that I relinquish him for adoption. I was unable to. I was unable to muster the courage. I deceived you. I informed you that he was ours, that it was an error that occurred prior to our marriage. You had faith in me. He was nurtured by you. You cherished him as if he were a part of your body. However, the reality is that he was not even that. He was the offspring of an unknown individual. And you? He became your universe, regardless. I am uncertain as to how you will react to this. However, I sincerely trust that you are aware that, despite any other mistakes I may have made, I was correct in my decision to select you. You were the sole individual who possessed the strength to serve as his mother, not due to your bloodline, but rather due to your identity. I refrained from migrating. The words were as heavy as a millstone on my chest. I am not biologically mine. It was not even inadvertently mine. Selected by an individual who neglected both of us, who provided me with a child and then departed as if it were a favor. My respiration was temporarily interrupted. My limbs experienced weakness for the first time in days. I sat down on the edge of the bed, holding the paper in my hand. My consciousness was flooded with a multitude of visual images. The first time I cradled Daniel to slumber, his tiny fists curled against my shoulder, his initial word, truck. I was so frightened by the fever that I drove to the emergency room in winter barefoot. He was so frustrated with the science fair project that he remained up late weeping when the volcano failed to erupt. His initial, genuine sorrow. His laughter upon discovering that he had been accepted to college. Every instant that I believed belonged to us. I had constructed my existence around this kid. I had constructed my identity around my role as his mother. I was now compelled to accept a situation that no woman should ever be required to endure. He never truly perceived me in that manner. He was delighted with the gift I presented. I was not the person I was. Not really. He would never have permitted her to place me in that kitchen if he had. He would have never maintained his silence. He would never have permitted them to eradicate me. I positioned the letter on the bed. I used my palm to smooth it out. It no longer felt like betrayal. It was a sensation of liberation. I had lived a version of myself that was exclusively present in service to others for 62 years. Spouse, mother, provider, phantom. However, I now observed something new as that truth stared at me in faded ink. I was unaware of the authority I possessed. As a result of my unconditional affection for an individual who was never mine, I did not allow that to deter me. Due to my decision to remain when others fled, I established a family, even when it was not inscribed in blood. Additionally, I had the option to make another selection, commencing immediately. The letter was left unopened on the dining table. It was not concealed. I neglected to secure it. Allow it to remain in place, unambiguous and discernible, like a truth that I no longer needed to conceal from myself. I traversed the residence as though it were my initial encounter. The walls are beige. The fading photographs of Daniel's high school graduation. The dent in the doorframe that resulted from his bicycle accident while attempting to enter the building. I used to grin at that dent. Presently, I maintained my gaze upon it. The home was a museum of sacrifices. Of all the methods I had employed to maintain his integrity, I had eradicated myself. The worn armchair in which I cared for him, the stitching kit that I employed to hem his trousers. His preferred cereal remains in the pantry, bunches of grains that have been sweetened with honey. Despite the fact that I have no longer entertained any fondness for it, it struck me all at once. I was unaware of my preferred cereal. I was unaware of the most recent book I had read, which was not a parenting guide or a book from the hospital's required reading list. I was unable to recall the last time I allocated funds for personal expenditures. Being his mother had occupied my life for an extended period. I had forgotten how to behave as a woman, an individual. After pouring myself a glass of water, I sat down on the settee. The home was now devoid of silence. There was no sense of isolation. It was sincere. My phone vibrated on the side table. Once more, Daniel. This time, the missive is lengthy, a distinct tone. I am unaware of the events that transpired. I have been contemplating all possibilities. Emily stated that she did not intend to cause you harm. I apologize for any sense of exclusion you may have experienced. If I were to feel, it is not due to your exclusion of me, not because you abandoned me. If I were to feel, it continued to pertain to his perspective, his ease, his isolation from accusation. I refrained from responding. As an alternative, I activated the television by grabbing the remote control. The room was filled with the hum of a cookery program. Remain composed, consistent. Again, my gaze was drawn to the letter. He was not mine, not in a biological sense, illegally. However, I had been his, until he explicitly stated that I was no longer a member of the family he was establishing. The agony within me was no longer directed toward him. It was for the version of myself that I had abandoned. To rear an individual who never once turned around to inquire, "Are you feeling well, Mother?" Throughout those years, I made all of those anniversaries special. I remained up past midnight on Christmas mornings to wrap dollar store gifts in exquisite ribbons. All of those you are to recline. I will wash the utensils. The type of days that I never experienced because no one ever extended an invitation. I had served as his background music, his protective net, his consistent silence. But this is no longer the case. I removed each framed photograph of us from the wall that evening, not as a result of rage, not out of animosity, because it was time to cease residing in a shrine to a version of motherhood that required my disappearance. I packaged them with care, wrapped the glass in antiquated cloths, labeled the container, "Recollections, not obligatory." Dinner was prepared by me, exclusively for my benefit, a recipe that I observed on a travel program. Roasted cherry tomatoes and garlic are served with lemon butter pasta. No poultry nuggets. Do not include a side of pasta and cheese. Exactly what I desired. During my meal, I enlightened a candle, played jazz that was gentle, arranged the table for one. Quiet prevailed. However, the vacant space is not. This was the sound of reclaiming something that I had not yet realized I had lost. I, myself. There was a moment of silence as the invitation list launched. Glitter markers are prohibited. Absence of gilded foil. A yellow notepad with a lined surface and the sound of my pens scraping across it. I transcribed the names one by one. Not individuals whom I was required to extend an invitation to. Individuals whom I desired to interact with. Claire. My previous acquaintance from the emergency room who would smuggle coffee into my compartment while I was working doubles. Mr. Henderson, my neighbor, who consistently cleared my driveway prior to my arrival, was responsible for this task. Dina, a customer at the bookstore I frequent on Sundays, consistently inquires about my week and provides attentive listening. Nurse Janet, who once lingered late on her birthday to assist me in covering a shift. My blood was not shared by anyone. However, each individual had made me feel acknowledged in a manner that my own son had never done. And that was the new motif. Individuals who observed me. It was not a wedding. It was not a holiday. Dinner is all. At my residence, in conjunction with my sustenance. At my desk, there are no collapsible chairs available. There are no facilities in the rear. For the subsequent few days, I dedicated myself to the preparation of all necessary materials. I did not do so in order to impress anyone. However, I did so because I desired to. I was not prepping something for someone else's story for the first time in years. Daniel was not the focus of this. It was not a matter of redemption. The objective was not to establish any facts. It was about creating a space for happiness. For myself, I personally selected the ingredients at the market. Basil that is currently in season. onion, heirloom tomatoes. Not a single chilled entree tray was visible. Additionally, I acquired a new tablecloth, blue, in conjunction with sunflowers. It evoked memories of an item that I would have appreciated in my 20s. Prior to the accumulation of all the shoulds that began to accumulate like blocks around my existence, I rose early on the morning of the supper and listened to music as I prepared the meal. Van Morrison, Stevie Nicks, Norah Jones. Garlic and olive oil emanated from my residence. Additionally, lemon rind. Similar to comfort, similar to exertion, like a sanctuary. The initial guest arrived shortly before 6 o'clock. Claire, accompanied by a bottle of red wine and a broad grin. "Maggie, you are absolutely stunning." Yes, I did. The hair is silky, gray at the temples, and is loose and confident. A linen garment that provided a refreshing sensation to my epidermis. Spanking is prohibited. No mascara tears are anticipated. I am the only one. Following that, they appeared in small numbers. 6 visitors. Laughter emanating from the entrance. Hugs that exceeded their intended duration. The act of pouring wine without obtaining permission. We dined at the table that I previously employed for folding laundry and assisting Daniel with his math assignments. Currently, it was replete with the sounds of clinking utensils, passing plates, and napkins being used to wipe the mouths of those who were laughing. I also chuckled. I was genuinely amused. Someone mentioned unsatisfactory initial encounters. Another individual acknowledged that they stole a pen from the bank on a weekly basis out of contempt. And somewhere between entree and seconds, it dawned on me. This was a family affair, not determined by bloodline, but rather by selection. On purpose. Genuinely. I did not experience any sense of abandonment. I did not experience a sense of supervision. I did not experience feelings of inadequacy. It was as though I were present. Claire raised a glass as we sat under the string lights I had strung across the back veranda toward the end of the evening. She expressed her gratitude to Margaret for being the type of woman who serves as a reminder that it is never too late to assume the position of leader at one's own table. Glasses were clinked by all. Softly, I chuckled. And I truly meant every word when I raised my glass and said, "To finally being seen." The doorbell rang shortly after noon. Not excessively noisy, not essential. However, it remains consistent. It was as though he was aware that I was at home and would not depart until I opened the door. I stood in the hallway, barefoot, and observed his silhouette through the frosted glass. Daniel. It had been 1 week since the wedding. I have been silent for 7 days. He experienced 7 days of disarray. The door was gradually opened by me. He maintained an identical appearance. However, this is not entirely accurate. The garment had vanished. The same was true of the radiance. He donned a t-shirt that was creased. He had dark circles beneath his eyes. The sight of me caused his lips to contract. It was as though he had rehearsed 10 distinct approaches to initiating this conversation and then promptly forgot them all. "Greetings, Mother." I refrained from responding. I withdrew. "Allow him to enter." He hesitated. Then, he proceeded to walk past me. The residence was impeccably maintained. Silent. The living room floor was illuminated by sunlight. The photographs were absent from the mantel, each and every one of his, he observed. The vacant spaces caught his attention. "What is the location of the photographs?" My response to the inquiry was to disregard it. "I requested that you sit down. Remain composed. Level." He yielded and sank into the armchair that was situated across from me. There was a prolonged period of silence between us. Finally, he exhaled. He ran his hand through his locks. "I did not come to this location with the intention of engaging in combat." I nodded. "All right. He shook his head. "I am unable to comprehend the events that transpired. Everything was in order for a brief period. Subsequently, you are conducting cancellations, posting payments on Facebook. That was a painful experience." He did not inquire about my emotions. "I apologize," he did not express. He desired an explanation. I stood, proceeded to the hallway closet, and extracted a box. "Place it gently on the coffee table that is situated between us." "What is this?" he inquired. I stated that receipts were required. Each one of them, within the previous 12 months. Venue deposits. dress adjustments, deposits for caterers. I even accommodated the additional dance floor you requested. Do you recall that? The papers were examined by his eyes, but they were not touched. Afterward, I extracted the subsequent item, the correspondence, the handwriting of his father, unmistakable. While he was reading, I refrained from speaking. I observed his countenance. Confusion initially ensued. Afterward, acknowledgement. Then the gradual, enveloping hue of skepticism. His gaze was directed upward. His voice broke. "You were aware?" "I am currently doing so," I stated. He forced himself to swallow forcefully. "Therefore, you are enraged because I am not enraged because you are not my biological son." I interrupted him. "Daniel, I am enraged because I was responsible for your upbringing. I devoted every ounce of my being to you. When the opportunity arose for you to recognize me, to rise and declare, 'This woman inspired me,' you declined." He gazed downward, completely silent. I continued. "You permitted them to force me into the kitchen. I maintained my composure. You observed them humiliate me. Additionally, you did not respond. My heart was broken by that. Not your DNA, not the financial aspect." He finally spoke, scarcely above a murmur. Emily stated, "I did not anticipate that it would be a significant factor." She stated that it would be more advantageous for the photographs, for the purpose of appearance. "I was under the impression that you would not be injured." I was amused. Sub-zero. Concise. "You failed to consider the situation." "Exactly." I rose from my seat. I proceeded to the mantel, elevated one of the vacant frames. "This was previously used to store a photograph of your kindergarten graduation. Your shirt was marked with a marker, and you were missing a tooth. You abruptly exited the stage and landed in my arms. Face down, I positioned it. I am tired of clinging to versions of you that are no longer present." He appeared to be struck, as evidenced by his sudden recoil. "Mother," I responded with firmness, "I am no longer the backdrop to your life. I am not affiliated with your financial institution. I am not a coincidence." He gazed at the ground. His mandible was compressed. He gingerly nodded. He muttered, "I apologize." "Insufficient. It is now too late." I lifted the box, secured the lid, and presented it to him. "These are now yours. Acquire them. Each receipt, each and every document, each reminder of the things you elected to disregard." He hesitated. Thereafter, the crate was retrieved. I escorted him to the door. He halted at the threshold. He gazed at me as if he were in quest of a fissure, a tenderness, a signal that the door may reopen at a later time. However, it would not. He said quietly, "You are the one who has always claimed that I am your entire world." I replied, "You were. I am now truly mine." I then shut the door. It was a welcoming environment, filled with hilarity, genuine mirth. The type that causes your eyes to squint and fills your chest without your awareness. The type that resonates through the walls and serves as a reminder that one is alive. The aroma of rosemary and garlic wafted through the air. The table was arranged with meticulous attention to detail. Cloth in shades of sunflower yellow and blue. Mismatched dishes. Cloth napkins that have been pleated into miniature fans. I had positioned a candle in the center, not to dazzle anyone. Due to my admiration for the silverware's lustrous appearance as a result of the flame, the living room was the gathering place for my visitors, who were enjoying wine and exchanging anecdotes. Mr. Henderson was situated in the corner, recounting an anecdote about how he once found himself unable to enter his residence while wearing only his undergarments. There was a collective outcry. Claire's eyes were streaming with tears as she laughed so vigorously. And I? I was standing in the kitchen, barefoot, and holding a glass of wine. With a smile. I am not anticipating my summons, not concealed behind a door, not to be overlooked. I served as the hostess. I was in attendance. I was observed. I presented the final dish, which consisted of roasted vegetables with sea salt and thyme. On a plate. Someone applauded as I placed it on the table. Claire exclaimed with a smile, "Chef Margaret has struck again." We continued to pour wine as we sat, past the containers. Claire raised her glass once more between the second helping and the final morsel of cornbread. "In my opinion, we ought to salute," she stated. Each individual inclined their head. "With respect to what exactly?" Dina inquired. Claire directed her gaze toward me. She referred to the act of selecting oneself. "Finally, it is important to recognize when to cease providing assistance to individuals who are only capable of receiving." Each individual elevated their glass, and I, too, ultimately, fully, raised mine. I rose from my seat. My palms did not tremble. There was no tremor in my voice. I examined each individual's countenance at the table, those who were not obligated to me by lineage or obligation, however, by choice, by means of affection, with regard. Additionally, I stated, to the mothers who maintained their silence for an excessive amount of time, to the women who sacrificed everything and were informed that it was insufficient, to the individuals who were requested to reside in the kitchen following the construction of the dwelling, this is intended for us. I pray that we never again sit down, unless it is at the head of our own table. Clinking glasses ensued. An individual expressed enthusiasm, and I sat down, not in the rear, not concealed, not in a state of exile. However, in my seat, my residence, Daniel did not make any further contact. I did not require him to do so. The individuals who were significant were already present. The following morning, I was awakened by the sound of birdsong and the illumination that streamed through my window. No remorse. My ribcage is not constricted. Absolute tranquility. I prepared coffee. I sat on the veranda, my robe delicately fluttering in the wind. I gazed out at my garden. Wild and brilliant roses are in full blossom. I was no longer the backdrop for someone. I was the primary character in my own existence. Lastly, finally, that was sufficient. Your voice is significant.